Welcome back to the Pirate Republic. This is an audiobook presentation of Pirates of the Wild West, the first novel in the Storm of Time series, released one chapter at a time. Well, we've now reached halfway in Pirates of the Wild West. I wanted to give a thank you to all of those who have enjoyed this, who have left reviews, who have left feedback. And if you are not subscribed to this, then of course you need to subscribe. And then if you are subscribed, then please like these episodes. It helps other people discover it, spread the word. And this chapter, we're going to catch up with Bart Roberts and Sam Bellamy on the ship, the Lurline, as it approaches the Hawaiian harbor of Honolulu in 1873. All right, you know what time it is. It's time to strap on the cutlass, load those cannons, and keep a weathered eye. This is Chapter 16, Charlotte's Fortune. Chapter 16, Charlotte's Fortune. In the early light of dawn, the seas had calmed, and the sky became clear, the emerging sun glowing orange as it reflected off the waters of the Pacific. The main deck of the ship was crowded with tussling patrons and weary crew members. The crew of the Lurline found themselves with a hard choice to make that morning, as the mutinied pirates and sailors rounded them up along with the passengers to announce the change in leadership. The captain of the ship and several high-level officers knelt in front of Bartholomew Roberts, shackled and bound atop the deck of the forecastle. Roberts paced behind them, holding his new revolving pistol as the crowd on the main deck watched and waited for him to speak. Roberts hid his glee as he thought of how surprised Captain Hilgard was to see armed sailors burst into the pilot room to take command of his ship. The man now knelt with a fearful expression on his trimmed, gray-bearded face. Once they had secured the captain and any holdouts, he and Sam had toured the ship. Their awe in the workmanship of the vessel grew as they found it to be enormous and elegantly appointed. Bart had never seen such finery as well as engineering in his life. Light, he was told by Chester, from electricity was utilized in many of the public areas of the Lurline. No fuel from oil was used, and it seemed magic to the two pirates. Flipping a switch up and down allowed all the bulbs to flicker off and on in an instant. Incredible, thought Roberts. He and Bellamy had just taken the greatest prize a pirate had ever thought to exist. Black Sam looked revitalized and practically galvanic for the first time since their near drowning on the Queen Anne's Revenge. Nothing like a bit of piracy to break the mood of being marooned in a new century, 150 years from your lost love. He and Sam had paid a visit to the dead Vern's cabin and retrieved their belongings. They both adorned themselves with their old weapons, clothing, and jewelry, though Sam also held a weapon of the current day, a long rifle with a cartridge of 8 rounds. Robert's exquisite cross hung comfortably around his neck, cutlass at his waist, hair tied back in a knot, every bit the figure of a pirate captain once again. "I am Bartholomew Roberts, voted captain of this ship by the crew. Your former Captain Hilgard has surrendered his ship to my command. He has accepted my mercy, as have several of his officers. They have declined to join us, but will be released unharmed upon our arrival at the Hawaiian Islands, within a day's journey. As passengers on this voyage, you will be confined in your rooms until we arrive. No harm will come to you if you obey my rules. Crew members will show you back to your cabins, where you will remain until we arrive in port." Roberts motioned with his hand to the armed crew on the main deck, who then began to escort the passengers to their rooms. He then looked about at the sailors and workmen that stood with him. He looked to Sam, then to Chester. "Sam Bellamy, do you agree to serve as first mate?" Sam nodded his head. "Chester, I need a capable quartermaster. Will you serve?" "Yes, Captain." "Go get that wound looked at by the ship's doctor, then report for duty," Bart told Chester. He looked at the bound, kneeling men and furrowed his brows. He pointed at a few armed sailors. "Find a secure place to hold these men until we reach port." He then sat on his haunches in front of the former captain. "Why don't you show us what's in the hold? See what kind of spoils we be carrying, and get me a list of all the passengers you're ferrying." Sam and Bart smiled at each other, then Sam grabbed Hilgard's arm and yanked him to his feet. "Lead the way," Sam told the captain as he pushed him forward, hands bound behind his back. Bart, Sam, Chester, and several men in charge of running the ship, along with the navigator, who had needed some convincing about continuing his duties, stood watching the first island of Hawaii emerge in the distance. The navigator stood over the map of the area, holding his gauze-wrapped hand that had been beaten with the butt of Bart's pistol, and confirmed they were on the correct course. The largest Hawaiian city of Honolulu was their destination. Bart was told the city sat on Oahu, the sixth island in the chain. They would arrive at the port of Honolulu late that evening. Bart and Sam had conversed with Chester for hours over the possible value of the goods that were stored in the hold. Some items Bart and Sam hadn't a clue as to their purpose. Machinery parts, Chester had told them. The three men had grown tired of opening boxes and crates that contained items such as clothing, grains, farming equipment, and the like. Chester had said that it may take them weeks to offload and sell the items to the parties waiting for them to arrive. Some may not be keen on dealing with pirates, but these issues Bart and Sam had dealt with many times. Bart had enlisted several sailors to go room to room and relieve the passengers of their valuables, deciding all should be left with a distributed sum of $30. This would allow them a room and meal at their destination. It was a custom that served him well in the past and furthered his reputation as a pirate of fair dealing. Sam had taken to this idea, deciding that it completed the mythology of them being Robin Hoods. The passengers for the most part were wealthy and offered up quite a haul to be split equally among the crew members, who were all now pirates themselves. Sam had suggested that Bart allow the crew to drink in celebration of their change in circumstances, but Bart had a general rule about drinking while on board ship. The rule stated that 1 drink of rum was the limit, unless fresh water was being rationed. This was certainly not the case on board the Lurline, which was furnished with thousands of gallons of fresh water stored in metal tanks. Though the passengers had engaged in constant merriment during their voyage, the bars and galleys were still well stocked. Once they arrived in this new port and dealt with the prisoners and selling of goods, there would be ample time for celebration. It was Bart's plan to offload several of the captured officers to alert the local government that he was requesting a parley. He would negotiate the release of the passengers and the captain for a fee. He might even be able to bargain with the government for the goods stored in the hold, so that the deal would have expediency and he could be on his way back to San Francisco to rendezvous with the other pirates. He smiled to think of their shocked faces when they looked upon his prize. The ship had no way of defending itself, but he would remedy that. They had found a good number of small arms aboard. Some were even found crated in the hold. These were most likely destined to arm a militia in the town of Honolulu. If the town's defenses included cannon, then he would have them for this ship before too long. A ship this size could probably hold more than 100 12-pounders. Imagine the look on Blackbeard's face once he sees this prize. In truth, he was only wanting to impress Charlotte de Berry. His thoughts had remained cluttered with visions of the exotic woman throughout his ordeal on board the Lurline. Lurline, obviously the name of the shipowner's love, daughter, or wife. It will not serve me, though. Bart looked to one of the sailors who had joined his crew with little hesitation. The man, whose name was Francis, had been a low-level mate who had jumped at the chance to raise his station aboard this ship. He had a crooked nose, most likely from a life of brawling in grog houses. "Find me some paint and someone good with their letters." "Aye, I can read and write," Francis replied. "Then we will be renaming this ship before we arrive," said Bart. Sam looked over with a sly smile. "What be her new name?" "Charlotte's Fortune," Bart said, without taking his eyes off the majestic cliffs of the Hawaiian island they were passing. Oh yes, he did have it bad for this lass. Sam only smirked. He knew that Roberts had an affinity for the name Fortune. Each ship Roberts had commanded had been christened with it. There had been the Fortune, Good Fortune, and the Royal Fortune. He also knew that the man was smitten with the African pirate queen, but now he knew just how much. Sam turned toward the sailor. "You heard your captain. Anywhere you see the name Lurline, it is to be changed to Charlotte's Fortune. Get to it." Charles Bishop's thinning gray hair blew in the wind as 6 men rowed the large skiff toward the ship previously named Lurline. He stroked his white beard out of a nervous habit that would arise when he was under undue stress. He could make out dozens of figures lining the rail of the Lurline, lighted in the dark of night by oil lamps that he knew from personal experience decorated the main deck of the grand ship. It had been just over an hour since he was awakened by a servant banging on his bedroom door. A Greenhorn harbor watchman had alerted all the king's cabinet members of a band of pirates seizing the steamliner while en route to Hawaii. The ship had arrived near midnight and anchored in the harbor, sending out a boat to deliver the ship's battered first mate with a message to send an official to negotiate the ransom and release of the captain and passengers. Charles had been quick to accept the job because of his position as the Foreign Affairs Minister, as well as other more personal reasons. The 6 men rowing the skiff, as well as the 4 other men accompanying him, were members of the United States and British Marines. They were armed and trained in warfare on land and sea. King William Lunalilo had inconveniently disbanded the Hawaiian army months ago after an attempted uprising when he had been the first elected king in Hawaiian history, so a formal Hawaiian military didn't exist any longer. Bishop was an American businessman who married a member of the Hawaiian royal family. He had recently grown to distrust the motivations of the Honolulu police force that was made up of so many of the disbanded army, so he took comfort with a portion of his escorts being members of the U.S. Marines and the other portion being British. That comfort was slowly dissipating as his crew of 10 men brought him closer to the starboard side of the ship, that now, in the flickering light, revealed 40 to 50 armed men sighting down their rifles and pistols at him. He took note of the name of the ship, freshly painted to say, Charlotte's Fortune. Charles told the Marines to leave their rifles in the boat and only take sidearms when they accompanied him in boarding the ship. If it came to a fight, it was not going to be one they would win with 10 rifles. He was now confident that they would be disarmed for the meeting, as they were greatly outnumbered, and he wasn't confident that those arms would be returned when the meeting was over. Charles struggled up the rope and wooden ladder as his 51-year-old body strained to maintain its balance against the gentle rise and fall of the anchored ship. He followed up 2 Marines with 4 more behind him over the railing of the Lurline. He waved off a hand of assistance from one of the Marines as he lifted himself from the ladder to the deck. Once they were all aboard, he straightened his attire and stepped forward to the 2 men in sailors' uniforms that stood waiting behind the line of riflemen ready for action. A sailor with a bent nose strode forward to greet him. "You a government type?" the sailor asked. "I am the foreign minister, a ranking member of the king's cabinet." The man looked him up and down, then turned to lead him away with a board. "Follow me." Charles sighed and nodded his head to his escorts and stepped in line to follow the man. His Marine escorts were indeed disarmed by 3 of the sailors, and then prodded along behind him by 24 of these so-called pirates. He was led up to the premier deck of the forecastle, where several men were gathered in an outdoor lounge area. There was a man on his knees dressed in a captain's uniform, bleeding from a gash on his forehead, to the left of a large wooden dining table. The man had his hands bound behind his back and a gag tied in his mouth. Most of the ship's men were standing, including a young man dressed in the costume of a 17th-century pirate, complete with a cutlass strapped to his hip. He was a handsome fellow with long, black, curly hair. There was a similarly dressed man seated at the table, enjoying a meal of baked fish and potatoes. This man was a bit older, maybe mid-30s, with a thin mustache. The man had dashing good looks and smiled broadly with a white-toothed grin as Charles was brought in front of him. "Ah, who have we here?" Roberts asked. "Says he's the foreign minister," the sailor with the crooked nose, Francis said. "Charles Bishop. Whom do I have the displeasure of dealing with on this dreaded night?" Charles asked with as much disdain and bravado as he could muster. He felt that he needed to put on a brave face and show that he wasn't intimidated by these men, even though all he wanted to do was escape with his own hide intact. "Join me, Charles Bishop. The fish in these waters are as succulent as I've ever tasted," Roberts said while continuing to eat from his plate. "I do not dine with murderers and thieves." "Sit, Charles," Roberts ordered. Charles was pushed forward and into the seat across from Roberts. Once sitting, Charles noticed the large barreled revolver lying on the table next to the pirate's plate. Roberts looked over at his new mate and nodded his head slightly. Francis turned and disappeared down a stairwell. "Straight to business it is then," Roberts said, wiping his mouth with a linen cloth. "My name is Bartholomew Roberts. Our good Captain Hilgard has resigned his ship and all its possession into my custody. We also hold several of his crew and hundreds of passengers in confinement until an agreed-upon ransom is delivered to us. We are also willing to sell the contents of the ship's hold to the highest bidder, in which time we will release the weary travelers and crew to your care. I have taken the liberty to list the terms and costs for you in this report." Roberts pulled out a folded sheet of paper and slid it across the table to Charles. "You have until sunset this very day to agree." Charles stared at the pirate for a long moment before picking up the paper and unfolding it to read the contents. He did his best to mask his emotions as he read the terms. The pirate wanted $100,000 in gold, provisions for his ship, 200,000 pounds of sugar, 100 small firearms with 5,000 rounds of ammunition, and 100 cannons along with 1,000 round shot. Bishop was a wealthy businessman and banker who could quickly calculate the values of trade items in his head. He needed to determine if Honolulu could meet the demands of these thieves without the need for loss of life. This island was becoming a booming destination for trade and travelers. It would do no good to have tragedy come to these passengers in their harbor. He also knew that the ship's hold carried many items destined for local companies that were needed for Hawaii's growing economy, but these terms were outrageous. He was tasked with finding a quick end to this disturbing development and deal a harsh punishment to these pirates once the passengers and cargo were secured. Charles leaned forward and steepled his hands. "Before I take your demands back to the king, let me enlighten you on a few details from your list. That way, we will be able to come to an agreement without too many boat trips across the harbor for my tired bones." "Far be it from us to discomfort you," Mr. Bishop Roberts chuckled, and the other men joined him in laughter. "Please do enlighten us as to our demands." Charles cleared his throat. "We are not a wealthy island, my good sir. $100,000 in gold would not be attainable from our meager coffers. It's possible that we could scrape together 20,000. I would, though, be able to provide you with a good amount of sugar and other provisions for your stores. We have no need of small arms and ammo in our peaceful town, so 100 is out of the question. A few, possibly a dozen, could be rounded up from the constable's office, but cannons are something we just don't have. The fort you see above the harbor is not in working condition, and hasn't been for over 50 years. No munitions or ordnance remains. It was built by the Russians back in 1817, and had only been in service a few years. Now we must come to a much more realistic, shall we say deliverable, ransom than what you have written on this list." Charles slid the report back toward Roberts. Just then Francis emerged from the stairwell and approached Roberts to whisper something in his ear. Roberts nodded, and the man went to stand near the doorway. Bart smiled at Charles as he leaned back in his chair. "Ah, a negotiation is what you're after. I see." Roberts turned toward Black Sam Bellamy. "Seems we need to come up with a new offer for this gentleman, Black Sam." Charles glanced over at the other ornately dressed man. This Black Sam fellow pulled a dagger from his belt, and with a malicious grin he walked over to a door just off the lounge area. Charles watched as the man exited through the door, but left it ajar. "You seem an amenable fellow, Charles Bishop," Roberts said, standing up. "So before you take back our demands to your king, I'd like to give you a parting gift." Charles practically jumped out of his chair when Sam Bellamy brought his wife out from behind the door with a gag in her mouth. Sam had a firm grip on the woman's arm with one hand. Bernice Pauahi Bishop was an attractive woman in her early 40s. She was of Hawaiian descent, with short, dark hair and dark eyes that were wide with fright. Those eyes pleaded with her husband for help as the two stared helplessly at one another. Bernice had booked passage on the Lurline for her return trip to Hawaii after a month-long trip to San Francisco. Charles was poised to bolt over to her when two sailors pushed him back into his seat, and others held guns at the ready against his marine accompaniment. Bernice was brought to Roberts by Black Sam, and Roberts took out his dagger to hold near her bare neck. Charles could only sit across the table and watch in horror as Roberts gently stroked his blade against Bernice's cheek. "Since we're negotiating, let me adjust the deal a bit to fit the circumstances we find ourselves in. Sam, hold out Mrs. Bishop's hand." Sam looked shocked at Roberts, his eyes wide. "I'm sure Mr. Bishop understands his position here," Sam said. Bart looked hard at Sam. I'd like to illustrate that for him so that we are perfectly clear. Chester? Chester stepped forward and forcibly grabbed the woman's hand and pinned it to the wooden table. Charles attempted to rise out of his chair again, but was held down by 2 men. Robert stood over Bernice. He spun the knife expertly in his hand, then slammed the tip of the blade into the table between 2 of Bernice's fingers. The woman winced, and a muffled cry escaped her gagged mouth. "Bartholomew, we don't—" Sam started, but went silent from a harsh look from Roberts. "What a beautiful wedding band you have on your finger," Bart said, as he held his blade to her digit just below the ring. He rocked the blade back and forth over the finger, lightly pressing against the flesh. Bernice's eyes leaked tears as she watched in panic. "I mentioned a parting gift for you, Charles, and I thought you would like this ring. I'm sure it has some sentimental value to you and would go far in persuading you to deliver on our demands." Roberts looked up from the ring to Charles's tearing eyes. "Why don't I just send you back with her finger as well? Seems a shame to separate the 2. Bart made a quick move to chop off Bernice's finger. "Stop!" Charles screamed. Roberts stopped just before the blade touched skin. "I'll agree to your terms. Don't hurt her, damn you." Roberts looked at the distraught man and smiled. "If you change your mind or wish to bargain more—" Roberts pulled his knife from the table and glided it up her arm to her throat. Charles swallowed hard and with a grim face said, "You will get what you ask for, but I am being truthful in regard to the cannons. Hawaii has none. We'll need to be compensated for the loss of the cannon. How much per cannon, Sam?" 1,000 each, Sam replied, not looking at him. Roberts roughly handed Bernice back to Sam and approached Charles. He lifted him out of his seat by his collar. That makes another $100,000, making the total in gold $200,000. Roberts then moved within inches of Charles's face. His voice became low and quiet. "If our terms are not met by sundown, I will be sending the passengers back to shore in pieces one by one, starting with your wife." Charles's eyes were wide with fright. He nodded his head and gave a last look to his wife's tear-stained face before he and his Marines were led away, back to their boat. Chester and the other men took Bernice back down to her cabin, and Sam stood watching the shoreline from the window. Roberts approached the young man. "Would you have cut off her finger?" asked Sam. "It's a tactic that I've used many times. Fear is a great motivator, fear not only of one's own life, but the lives of others." The man clearly loved his wife and most likely had little concern about the money for ransom. He was only a negotiator, but as we found out, a negotiator with the unfortunate luck to have his wife in our possession. Sam was silent and made no move to ease the tension in the room. "Your reputation as a merciful pirate, generous even, has served you well," Bart Roberts said, as he stood next to Sam watching the small boats move about the harbor. "But one must be able to adapt and overcome all obstacles. Hard choices are sometimes the one a captain must make. We are pirates, Sammy. We must show strength before our men. When the coffers are full, the crew are happy as clams, but when there are hard times, they will mutiny should you seem too soft." "You still didn't say whether you'd have severed her finger," Sam said solemnly. Bart Roberts smiled. 9 fingers can play a harpsichord almost as well as 10. I hope you're enjoying this historical fiction book with pirates and time travel all wound together in it. You can find the ebook and physical books at my website, briancantrell.com. You can also find the second book in this series, Pirates of World War II. And if you're a fan of pirates, you can check out thepiraterepublic.com. It's a weekly newsletter that I put out every Friday. All sorts of great pirate history, events, news, and happenings. You can also toss a few doubloons our way by joining our Patreon at Patreon, The Pirate Republic. We'll see you next week. Till then, fair winds and keep a weathered eye.